Well, thank you all so much. There's just so much to discuss. What we'll do is we'll have a little bit discussion on stage here, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. Please take this moment to check your phone. If you're not sure if it's off, please check that it's off, this side of the room in particular. Okay, so let me start, first of all, just by playing devil's advocate here, because there's been a lot of talk from very many perspectives about all of the wonderful things that cultural exchange and diplomacy can do. But we've also seen, particularly historically, how exactly this partnership between the state and the artist can be compromising, because as you mentioned, the state has a particular political agenda. Sometimes artists do not want to be associated with it. Number two, because it may be selecting, just purely through the selection of what kinds of programs the government supports and shows other places, it is making a political statement. In the same way that we see other countries, China during the Olympics, how it rolled out a show for the world to see. So let's talk a little bit about some of the troubling aspects of cultural diplomacy. And Vishaka, why don't you start, because you touched on this first in your talk.
Well, I was just saying to you that I was in Singapore to do a big keynote lecture on arts and foreign policy in the 21st century. And primarily my thesis was that this is a very important tool in the toolkit, how we can use it. And it was my Singaporean artist friends who said, wait a minute, don't you think there's a danger that you actually compromise your art because you become a tool of the government? Coming from Singaporean artists, this is an important issue. But I think that it is something that can be complicated. And it's not surprising that historically often the kind of things we sent abroad, jazz, modern dance, things that are not so controversial. And I remember my friends from the Rockefeller Foundation, when you were doing lots of arts international stuff, that if they were contemporary artists and some artists were not exactly quite kosher, it does create a problem. But that's where I think what I like about, and this is not just because Mara is here, but the truth is that if you talk to Judith McHale, the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, who used to be the head of Discovery, she's very clear. And she said, there are certain things that in fact is better if you guys do it in the private sector, will come in the back. We right now are working with them on a commission in India, and she said, if we took the lead, it'd be too much bureaucracy. So go the other way, and then we'll see how we can support you. So part of it is to be flexible and figure out when it would work and when it doesn't work. And hopefully with enlightened governments, actually that's easier to do than the other way around. Is that fair?
That's very fair. I mean, I would just say there are some arts groups that it's not appropriate to be affiliated with the government. It's just not. And that balance is what's so great about America, that there can be private efforts and engagement happening completely separate from the government, and that's a different side of America. And I think, what we try and do at the State Department is put out, obviously, a side that, we support and want to show, but recognize that this isn't the be-all, end-all. This is one segment. And, we don't get involved when we're not wanted. And I think that it is true that we do cultural programs and we take on a risk. There absolutely is no guarantee when you send out an artist or you send out an envoy or you send out any human being that they're going to say anything that you would be proud to say. But that's important. That's what America is about. It's about speaking out and being able to say what you think and being able to express yourself. And I think that for us, and the way, just so it's clear, the way we select our artists is all of our programs we give out, we do competitive grant process. So US-based not-for-profits will apply for an open call for proposals. So we give out our grants to US-based not-for-profits to run our programs. So for example, the visual arts program that I talked about that we just launched, BAM, I'm sorry, not BAM, the Bronx Museum. Yeah. BAM's our other grantee. Right. You might notice a New York theme in some of our programs. And the Bronx Museum will select the artists that go abroad. And BAM, who does our Dance Motion USA program, will select the dancers that go abroad. and Jazz at Lincoln Center does our music program, and they pick the bands that go abroad. So we are not picking the artists, we're leaving it to the professionals who do a panel of experts. We will have final review to make sure that we check in with the embassy and the people who are living in the ground to say, does this work with your audience? Are we totally missing the boat here? Does this seem like this would be a good fit?
Have there, let me just
yeah.
ask you, have there been instances, whether they were foreseen or unforeseen, because that's often the case, you don't even realize that somebody can be quite as controversial, that have come up during your tenure?
It's interesting, one just recently happened. So we sent this amazing hip hop group, Chenlo and Liberation Front, to Yemen and to other countries, and they reached.
When was this?
This was earlier, last
Before
year,
the last couple of weeks, yeah.
Yeah, we're not in the business of sending people to media conflicts intentionally. We like our artists. And they were able to reach audiences that never, ever would have come, and probably wouldn't have come to see a jazz group, certainly wouldn't have come to hear a lecture, certainly wouldn't have come into the walls of the embassy to, come to an American corner or engage with any of our diplomats. And it was a great success because we hadn't reached a youth audience in that way before. And last week, I think, we got an email from a conservative-leaning news organization who had dug up some lyrics that they had written in 1982 in high school and said, how can you do this? How are you using taxpayer funds to send out a group who once wrote these lyrics? And I'd never seen those lyrics. Nobody in the State Department had ever seen those lyrics, but that's part of the risk that you take. And you're always going to be criticized. But at the end of the day, can you step back and is this program worth it? Am I responsibly using taxpayer funds? Are we achieving the goals that we're looking to? Are we reaching new audiences? Are we opening minds in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do? And I think the answer is ultimately yes, but none of us are under the illusion that we do that with no risk, or that and we certainly don't script anybody when we send them out. And that's part of sending Americans abroad, is that we don't know exactly what they're going to say, but hopefully they'll present at least one face of America of our many faces. So I think it is absolutely a risk.
And also, going back, the first public-private partnership that I know of is Arts International, which was begun back in 1986 or 7, was really a partnership between the Rockefeller Foundation and the State Department, actually USIA. And
Ford Foundation.
Pardon?
And Ford Foundation.
Later, the Ford Foundation, but originally I don't think Ford was so involved. And many people, the general consensus was that by having a private entity supported by private foundations kind of took away that notion that this was somehow rather subversive state-organized culture that was being promoted on a global stage. And I think that remains a factor for today's public-private partnerships. I think that we have been engaged with the State Department on a number of the partnerships that Mara has mentioned, and we do it for two reasons. First, I think that it probably makes those partnerships more successful if the State Department can turn around and say that they are being privately funded as well as funded by the State Department. And hopefully they are making a statement to other foundations to say that there's an opportunity for smaller foundations to become involved in this field by engaging with the State Department for the purpose of cultural exchange projects. You may or may not know, but the disinvestment that occurred in the public sector in this field was paralleled in the private sector, in the private foundation sector. And I've done extensive research on this, and it's really appalling the number of foundations that used to be involved that are no longer involved. The biggest funder of international cultural exchange today is the Trust for Mutual Understanding, with an average payout of about $2.5 million. I mean, there were years when the Rockefeller Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Ford Foundation, and others were spending millions of dollars on this kind of work, and they're just out of the field.
Right. Well, I think that's a problem across the board, certainly for all nonprofits in fields. Let me just move on to ask another question, and we'll soon open it up, given the time. But Anne, what you talked about really went, it seemed to me, with these residencies, really went in very different ways, and in many ways went beyond what we would normally think of cultural diplomacy. I mean, on the one hand, coming up with a construction design that would be earthquake resistant, it just seems brilliant, regardless of culture. You know, an engineer come up with that. The Maya Lin project seems more, without having a real sense of what she's doing, supporting a very well-known, accomplished artist to fund a project that she finds interesting. So, you know, it seems kind of to fit everything in there. Is there a sense of balancing what one sees as the kind of social utility of the project versus the support of an individual artist?
Well, what we're really interested in artists having great ideas that are going to connect them with people and really help grow their work and take them to new places. And places, primarily we're interested in developing countries, but not exclusively developing countries. So it's really about nurturing the artist's process, and the artists don't see themselves as limited to a studio any longer, and they don't see themselves limited to a gallery space or a museum space. They see themselves as working out in the world. And this merger of art and life is coming together. We don't necessarily need to think about art as something you put, you know, on a pedestal or hang on a wall, but really it's about an engagement.
I mean, one of the things I was thinking of, obviously that seems quite an expensive program to support an artist going around, but given the lack of resources that
It's not that bad, actually.
I guess
No,
the living
it really
expenses
isn't.
in Haiti
Yeah.
are not that high these days. So.
No, I mean, it's cheaper than presenting a public art project. It's all relative.
Right. Well, I was thinking actually that new media, in fact, probably reduces the cost a lot, so that perhaps in some ways the dollar figures are not necessarily the best way to compare engagement previously to now. Let's open up to the audience.
I'm sorry, before you do that,
Oh,
can I just
yes.
respond to that? Because I think that there's something to be said for, I hate to put things into financial terms, but the impact. And so, you know, we were talking about, how many of you saw the Academy Award nominated film Wasteland on the artist Vic Muniz? Great. So, you know, for those of you who are going to see it next week, here's an artist who decided to work with the poorest of poor in Rio, the garbage pickers or recyclers of South America's largest landfill. And you won't get all of this from the film because a lot of it happened afterwards. But not only did the artist raise money, paid for these people to collaborate with him, then raise money so that he could build schools, health care centers, build a library. He also had laws changed so that these garbage pickers no longer had to sell to middlemen, and they could sell directly to industry. So their income for thousands and thousands of garbage pickers were completely transformed. And then they put together the first conference in South America of recyclers, and then they advanced a law to make recycling legal for the first time, or mandatory, in Brazil. I mean, that's a major deal. So maybe this project cost $100,000, but the long-term environmental impact and the impact on these people's lives, I hate to sound so corny, but it's priceless.
Right. Well, but that
Good commercial
but that
for
project,
MasterCard, right?
but that project also seems to fall more along the lines, you know, of social entrepreneurship.
right,
when we,
right.
you know, we really, whether you're talking about from the Grameen Bank or other projects where, and that's wonderful when artists can intersect like that. But it also seems, as we can tell from our panel, there's many different aspects to that.